Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman, and this is the Motorola Moto G35. Let's get into the review. So when the Motorola Moto G35, which Motorola Australia has loaned to me, it's going back to them, arrived here on my reviews desk, I kind of thought, well, wow, it's another budget Moto G phone, and Motorola's got a lot of them. Here in Australia, it'll run you $199, and that's often been a bit of a sweet spot for Motorola, but also a spot where they've crammed a lot of different phones in, making it kind of tricky to pick which one is the right one for you. I've got to be honest here, the Moto G35 isn't an absolute standout in too many areas, but it gets most of the basics right. There are still some catches you've got to be aware of, though. In design terms, from the front, what we're looking at is a 6.7-inch 2400 by 1080 pixel, 120Hz capable LCD display. I mean, you weren't going to see an OLED at this price, but it's reasonably sized, reasonably fast. I do like the fact that Motorola makes it possible to choose between 60Hz, 120Hz, or a dynamic setting. So many phones only do it's 60Hz or dynamic. I love having extra choice here. In Australia, the Motorola Moto G35 ships in just this color, midnight black, although in other territories, other colors are available. The one upside here, I would rather generally consumers had more choice, but the one upside here for me is that the midnight black is just in this acrylic plastic finish, where some of the other finishes appear to be in vegan leather, and any regular viewers of this channel will know I'm not a big fan of vegan leather. I really hate the feel of it, but this doesn't actually matter too much anyway, because you do at least get a case in the box. And not surprisingly for anyone who has watched any of my videos, this case has lived on this phone for my entire review period, apart from shooting the start of this video, basically. Although that's also a really sensible step, because at this price point, you can't really expect too much in terms of water resistance. Motorola simply says that it's water repellent, which, well, basically everything but a sponge is water repellent, Motorola. Try not to get this phone wet. On the camera front, budget phones used to have a terrible reputation for camera quality, and some of them are still kind of mediocre. But over the years, we've found ourselves in a position where most budget phones can do decent things in decent, simple light, decent, simple shots, that kind of thing. Everyday consumer photos are generally okay, and yeah, the Moto G35 does that, basically. In hardware terms, it's equipped with a primary wide 50 megapixel sensor, 8 megapixel ultra wide, and then at the front, a 16 megapixel selfie camera, with the capacity for digital zooming of up to 6 times. Now, is that worth doing? In short, no. Here's a sample 6 times photo taken outside the Queen Victoria building in Sydney, and yeah, Vicky's looked better than that before, I think you'll find. Although the wide especially is a decent enough shot there. The ultra-wide slightly less so. I would shoot with the wide as much as possible to get the best possible photos out of this camera. There is another challenge here though, and that's the fact that the Moto G35 is a really slow camera. The time between when you can take one shot and when you can take another is glacial. You'll really have to wait a while to get these shots out of there. It's kind of hard to demo on video, but it just takes way too long. You can very much jump into a shot and see it doing its post-processing while it's waiting to take the next shot, which basically means a lot of action scenes, anything you want to do that's fast, is not going to work well. Rather predictably, low light also isn't a high point. If you're after smartphone photography, of course, at $199, what do you expect? This is not exactly out of the ordinary, but certainly you've got to be aware of its limitations before buying. Under the hood, the Motorola Moto G35 runs on a Unisoc T760 processor with just 4 gig of RAM and 128 gig of storage for the Australian model. I'm aware that there are some international models that bump that up to 256 gig or 8 gig of actual RAM. I know, yes, it does virtual RAM, but the model sold here is just a 4 gig RAM model. And that is somewhat in line with its budget stylings. 8 gig is obviously better and more preferable if you can get it, although I'm sure here in Australia, if you imported one of those, it would cost you quite a bit more. What does that actually mean in performance terms? Well, to give that some context, I ran it through Geekbench 6's CPU test up against similarly priced phones as well as its immediate predecessor. Here's how the Moto G35 fared. That is a nicely solid result within the budget pack, and that's a really, really important qualifier. It's also much the same story if we look at GPU performance using 3D Mark's benchmarks, where the Moto G35 leads the pack, albeit by a smallish margin from some phones. So while those are good results for the Moto G35, it's really vital to keep in mind that this is still a slowish phone. It's just a little bit better than some of the other phones in benchmark terms. In day-to-day usage, you are still going to hit periods of lag. And for this particular phone, I really am going to put more of the blame on the 4 gig of RAM and the way it swaps that around, even with virtual RAM in play, than anything else. You've basically got to have a bit of patience. Apps will take longer to load. Things will take longer to happen or to install. This is not a particularly fast phone, and again, that's what you get in this budget space at this point in time. One very nice and welcome inclusion on the Moto G35 is NFC, so you can use it for contactless payments, and that's not common at this kind of price point. So if you did want something to act as your virtual credit card for when you're out shopping, yeah, this will fulfill that task. The other task it will fulfill as well is 5G, and again, not common in a $199 phone. Now, it's only sub 6 gigahertz, but for most people, 5G at this price point is more going to be about future-proofing than it is really about network speeds. My own tests, primarily in Sydney and at least partially on the New South Wales Far North Coast, showed few connection problems to speak of, but obviously this can be very, very widely variable depending on where you live, especially if you're in the more remote parts of Australia. However, the reality of future-proofing, having 5G, having NFC, has to be counterbalanced against the fact this is an Android 14 phone, and Motorola is only promising one Android update and 3 years of security updates. Now, I get it. Budget phones are harder to program for because they're slower, and predicting what future Android versions are going to do is tricky, and security update provision can be hard as well. Still, with what some of its competitors are doing in phones that don't cost that much more than this phone, I would have liked to see at least maybe one more Android update and maybe one more year of security updates, because I feel as though a lot of the people who are going to want to buy this phone are going to want to hold on to it for a really long period of time, as long as they can, because very few people buy a $199 phone because they just want a $199 phone. And so having lesser value there in terms of updates, yeah, I think that is a little bit of a problem. Not as bad as some other Motorola phones have been over the years, but still not great. In battery life terms, Motorola does not buck the trend of Android phones right now. While it states that the Moto G35 has a massive battery, what it means by massive battery is in fact 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which is absolutely stock standard for Android right now. I'm not sure that massive applies, but of course, the real test here is in terms of battery endurance, and everyone's usage is different. I've got a full video up about battery testing and why it's always going to be variable and how I test, which I encourage you to go and watch. But to give this some comparative context, I ran the Moto G35 through my standard YouTube 3-hour battery test. Here's how it compared. So with my optimist hat on, look, yeah, 92% for that first hour is reasonable. Anything that falls below 90% in my experience is a phone that is likely to struggle to last a day's moderate usage, so it at least passes that barrier. But there's no getting around the fact that this is a phone that performs a little bit worse time on time against its competition, and even against the phone that it's basically replacing in the Moto G34. That's not great. It's not the worst problem to have, but I certainly would have liked to see slightly better battery performance here. At this price point, of course, you can't expect wireless charging, and you don't get it. You also don't, at least for the Australian model, get a charger in the box, just a USB-C to USB-A cable. It's capable of 18-watt charging, not super fast, but workable enough if you're the type who just plugs their phone in overnight so they can pick it up off their bedside table in the morning, ready to go for another day. So should you buy the Motorola Moto G35? Well, look, the key factor that should decide whether or not this is the right phone for you is its asking price. Honestly, it's all about that $199. $199 is not much to spend on a smartphone. And while this is yet another cheap Moto G phone, the balancing act it plays here between performance and power and battery life is not an unreasonable one, and I have already seen some of the retailers selling it here for, in fact, less than that $199 price, which of course makes it even better value. If your needs are on the basic side and you're not that fussed about smartphone photography all that often, it should suit nicely while being inexpensive. But be aware, you will inevitably hit its slower side in day-to-day use, so some patience is advised. And that's my take on the Motorola Moto G35. If you've got any questions, hit me up in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching all the way through to the end. Thanks for subscribing, and please consider becoming a financial supporter of the channel so I can keep on reviewing phones like this.